I fell in love with the Star Wars trilogy as it was known then, while watching my brothers pan and scan VHS copies of them back in the mid-90s. And as I watched them, my little brain was filled with questions about the wonderful and mysterious things I saw on screen. I wonder what the Clone Wars were like. What about Obi-Wan and Anakin when they were young? What does Boba Fett look like under that mask? Is he human or what? What the fuck are those aliens up to over there? I wonder what the world they come from looks like. It occurred to me sometime after watching Attack of the Clones, I think. Perhaps those questions were really better off left to the imagination. Because really it was those questions, those gaps in the story, the suggestion of an unimaginably vast galaxy going on beyond the confines of the film frame that really made my imagination fire.
There's something about the act of will involved in believing in preposterous things that I believe is the very kind of muscle and key of having an imagination. And if you are spoon-fed everything's plausible, everything is within the same patina of reality in that way, I wonder what these younger people are going to be like.
It was one of the hallmarks of the original trilogy. We get little snippets of information here and there, strange creatures, fantastical landscapes, and distant events are seen or heard, sometimes only for a few frames, and then never really elaborated on. All this stuff adds a huge amount of texture and gives us the impression of an organic, densely populated world and suspends our disbelief in this fictional universe. But it also makes our imaginations work by not giving us the full picture, by challenging us to try and fill in those gaps for ourselves. And when our brains are busy, we are engaged with the film world. Less is more. For better or worse, depending on your perspective, that's the dictum that escaped Star Wars many years ago. It doesn't take a high midichlorian count to see that when a set of movies and a fictional universe is so beloved, people have different conceptions of it, and so logically they have different opinions about it. It's plainly visible from scrolling through almost any Star Wars YouTube comments section that there are a lot of people out there who are completely fucking unhinged. So considering the current climate, given the near total social media saturation and ubiquitous high-speed internet that we have today, given the baked-in, fissiparous tendencies of Homo sapiens, given that the internet has in many ways encouraged and facilitated this unfortunate tendency, that so many people seem to have unlearned how to reach any kind of modus vivendi with one another, given that the Star Wars fraternity is splintering in a manner remarkably similar to that of a religious schism, there's only really one option. Pull up the anchor and move away from the events of the so-called Skywalker saga. And LucasArts and BioWare took a stroll along that path almost 20 years ago now.
Many of the missiles which have hit the Iraqi capital Baghdad have been fired from US ships in the Gulf. One of those is the USS Mobile Bay, which fires Tomahawk cruise missiles. Our correspondent Brian Barron sent this report from the Mobile Bay as it prepared for another night of airstrikes on Baghdad.
It's from these Tomahawk missile pens that the lethal bombardment of Baghdad was launched.
Let me take you back to a time long, long before Disney, the sequel trilogy, The Mandalorian, and all that stuff. A time before broadband internet had fully taken hold, a time before Facebook and YouTube, and therefore a time when we were not quite so well acquainted with a certain section of the Star Wars fraternity, those most balanced, sober-minded, and Jedi-like of individuals who consistently demonstrate a firm grasp of the source material. The year was 2003, and the Star Wars prequels were in full force. I don't really want to get into the merits of the individual films for some reason. Suffice it to say that in 2003, to many of us at least, Star Wars didn't really feel like Star Wars anymore. It wasn't just the movies either. Look at the games LucasArts started releasing around this time. Jedi power battles, Star Wars Demolition, Super Bombard Racing, and even the Episode 1 tie-in itself. I remember thinking back to the days of Dark Forces, X-Wing Alliance, or even Shadows of the Empire. I'm not saying they didn't release some bad games, but LucasArts wouldn't have dreamed of releasing stuff like this just a few years earlier. Something had changed. The Phantom Menace struck an intentionally kid-friendly tone, and I've never had any qualms with that shift in and of itself. Presumably the games were intended to shift with it, with the exception of the Phantom Menace game, I guess, which is rock hard in places and absolutely filled with blaster fire and joyful maiming. But anyway, as Nintendo shows us with great regularity, a child-centric game doesn't mean that it has to be. Anyway, when news of a Star Wars RPG game developed by a still somewhat nascent developer called BioWare came to light, I think many in the gaming community were sort of mildly interested, and so was I, with a number of caveats. It's my contention that Knights of the Old Republic and its sequel can teach us quite a bit about the central appeal of the Star Wars fictional universe, its magic, mystery, excitement, and seemingly limitless possibilities. And it can also offer us clues as to where the series really has to go, if its owner wants it to have any meaningful, or even longer-term commercial future. Taking inspiration and quite a bit of material from the Tales of the Jedi comics conceived by writer Tom Veitch, Knights of the Old Republic is set 4,000 years before the movies. When I first heard this, I thought, great, what a smart move. Now they can get away from all this underwhelming epic stuff that clashes with what was established in the original films, and get on with telling their own story. It was a glowing review of the game in the Guardian's Guide supplement, remember that? It used to be awesome back in those days. That really pushed me over the edge. It promised a game that actually felt like Star Wars, featured sweeping vistas, a fantastic original score, and an epic storyline with a quite legendary twist. Well, that sounded like just the tonic to many of us at that time, and for the most part, it absolutely delivered. We start on a Republic cruiser. Apart from some slightly ropey but acceptable voice acting, this opening scene is functional. It's essentially a tutorial and it's absolutely fit for purpose. I was a bit confused that this game was set 4,000 years ago, and yet technologically it seems much the same as the prequel era, but okay, I'll go with it. On a side note, this is a bit of a missed opportunity, I'd say, actually, considering some of the more visually distinctive images we see in the original Tales of the Jedi comics. My guess is that they probably didn't want it to look too unfamiliar, so as not to alienate the broader range of Star Wars movies fans. Anyway, the ship is about to blow, and you have to get your gear together, learn how to fight, and get the hell off the ship. It tries to be a punchy little action scene to start us off on our grand adventure, but it doesn't exactly knock your socks off. But as I'd soon learn, the magic of this game isn't in its spectacle. No. The magic of this Star Wars game was something much more meditative and cerebral. Something quiet, calm, and character-based. And it's when I crash-landed in Taris and that music began to play that I began to become completely absorbed by this game.
Good to see you up instead of thrashing about in your sleep. You must have been having one hell of a nightmare. I was wondering if you were ever going to wake up. I'm Karth, one of the Republic soldiers from the Endar Spire. I was with you on the escape pod. Do you remember? I'm not surprised. You took a serious blow to the head. You're probably having all kinds of strange dreams. I wouldn't worry too much about it. You've been slipping in and out of consciousness for a couple of days now, so I imagine you're pretty confused about things. But try not to worry. We're safe. At least for the moment. We're in an abandoned apartment on the planet of Taris. We were banged up pretty bad when our escape pod crashed, but luckily I wasn't seriously hurt. was able to drag you away from our crash site and all the confusion, and I stumbled into this abandoned apartment. By the time the Sith arrived on the scene, we were long gone.
There are times in the original trilogy where there's almost no dialogue whatsoever, and we are just absorbed in the sweeping landscapes, weird and wonderful creatures, and fascinating and unfamiliar images. I'm thinking in particular about the magical scenes on Tatooine in the first film, or to a lesser extent just a little sequence of Rey scavenging from the Star Destroyer and sliding down the dunes on her little sled daily. In the case of the first movie, these scenes are practically a throwback to silent cinema, and to Kurosawa too, of course. On watching it today, it strikes me just how little space, no pun intended, is left in genre movies like this these days. I'm talking about time that the audience can simply spend watching the movie and not being assaulted by it or having it wrangle us around like a herd of confused, senile old cows. Time that we can simply spend seeing, hearing, and breathing in these strange new worlds. And these sequences are where Star Wars and Lucas really shines, in my opinion. Pure visual storytelling with little or no dialogue, images that leave us enthralled and that send our imaginations into a spin. George and Ralph McQuarrie and lots of other people were most definitely possessed by a certain kind of genius when they created the world of Star Wars. The sense of unimaginably vast distances, unimaginably vast expanses of time, and its worlds that feel simultaneously old and futuristic, captured the imaginations of millions of people worldwide. And in Knights of the Old Republic, we have hours upon hours in which we can just bathe in these amazing alien worlds. The original trilogy gave us Tatooine, Hoth, Dagobah, Endor, the Death Star itself, and what's to me the most majestic of all Star Wars locales, Bespin Cloud City. My god, what a sight to behold, it still is. So what does Knights of the Old Republic give us? Well, in short, it doesn't have anything quite as inspiring as some of the worlds in the original trilogy, but there is some good stuff here. The standouts for me are Manaan and Dantooine, I'd say, and the Sith world of Korriban's pretty cool as well. Oh, and that Builder's homeworld too. Yeah, pretty good. What makes a great Star Wars locale? It's massively subjective, of course, but for me the litmus test is simply, would I actually like to spend time in these worlds? Well, with Dantooine, in Knights of the Old Republic, I still sometimes find myself pining to just sit around in that swaying grass with those weird manta ray things passing overhead, and also listening to that music. I mean, this is music that I still put on when I'm in the bath, for fuck's sake. This has to be a good sign, surely. Taris too, the upper city, is a bit derivative of Bespin, but every time I step out of that initial hideout apartment and into the city proper, and that music pipes up, I just... Well, I have to say that for me, Knights of the Old Republic passes that litmus test more frequently than the prequels and the sequels do, I'm afraid. The characters. As I said earlier, putting aside the relative merits of the movies themselves, I don't think making the prequels or the sequels was a terribly good idea in the first place. Why? I hear some of you scream. Well, let me give you an example. The prequels and sequels were always off to a bad start in that they had the difficult, if not impossible, task of playing younger versions, older versions, or close relatives of characters we already knew and loved. And meeting audience expectations on that front was always going to be a bit of a fool's errand, in my opinion. Knights of the Old Republic stars a new set of characters, and this was a very wise or a very fortunate thing indeed. We have a main character who, kind of like Luke in the original trilogy, is pretty much a blank canvas. He's our window into this world. We can project ourselves onto him and imagine ourselves in the role. This gives us a fixed, clear perspective on the various worlds, on the cosmic events that unfold, and on the other characters. And we get a good sense of those characters' relationships. It has the advantage of being a 30-odd hour game rather than a 2-hour movie, but regardless, it's pretty successful at building these connections, mostly through the dialogue scenes you share with your party throughout your journey, but also through the specific character-related quests in each of the worlds. We feel like we kind of get to know these people over the course of our journey, and to some degree, we become emotionally invested. Look, it isn't exactly Ibsen, but neither were the original movies, and it's definitely more than fit for purpose. Are these characters as memorable as the ones in the original trilogy? No. But in fairness, it's a bit much to expect to be as memorable as a set of such archetypal characters: the farm boy hero, the princess, the dashing rogue, the wizard. It's also hard to touch the performances of Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and Alec Guinness too, of course. That being said, I really like the characters of Karth and Bastila in particular, an old cantankerous Jolie Bindo to a slightly lesser extent, and the murderous and mildly humorous assassin droid HK-47. Also, the voice work we get in Knights of the Old Republic is very solid. At times it's more like listening to a radio play than playing a game, such is the amount of dialogue. And in truth, the dialogue is sometimes more Star Trek than Star Wars in tone. But when it's as solid, and at times even compelling, as it is here, that's A-okay with me. Bastila is played by Jennifer Hale, who does a great job. Ultimately, I think Bastila is the most memorable and identifiable character from these games, and a huge part of this is down to the soothing sound of Jennifer Hale's voice. Unlike the Jedi's portrayal in the prequels, Bastila actually gives us a sense of some emotion, depth, and complexity to her character. She's a hugely talented Jedi, but also headstrong and highly strung, and the game's entirely successful at communicating that to the player.
Yes, I suppose I can understand your curiosity, given the bond that connects us. Very well. I'll tell you a bit about myself. I was found to be strong with the Force at a young age, as most Padawans are. As a girl, I was given to the Order to be trained. When I joined the Order, I left my family on Tal-Ravin, as all Padawans do. My family is still there, the last that I had. I've had little contact with them, as it is discouraged. Relationships with family members are fraught with powerful emotions. Such extremes are to be avoided. Anger and hate are the worst, but even love can lead to folly. Emotional entanglements can be dangerous. They can impair rational thought. They can lead to outbursts of uncontrolled emotion. A Jedi must be above such things. It can be a hard lesson to learn. I was not on good terms with all of my family, but I do remember missing my father terribly for a long time. I was not on good terms with my mother. I was only a little girl when I left, but I was old enough to resent her and the way she treated my father. She pushed my father into treasure hunting. I spent all my young life on ships, traveling from one false lead to the next. She whittled away my father's entire fortune, and I hated her for it. I think she was relieved to give me to the Jedi, but my father was heartbroken. A child is too young to understand the sacrifices that must be made. It's better if they have no contact with their family once they're removed. Once I was older, I realized the wisdom of this policy. A Jedi must do what is needed, personal desires notwithstanding. Love can only obscure and confuse the matter. Even a Jedi cannot always control the feelings of the heart. We must do our best to guard against it, no matter what the cost. Some sacrifices are harder than others. I do not wish to discuss this anymore. I would rather return to our mission.
She's a pretty convincing character, and this gives it a critical advantage over the prequels, in my opinion. Anakin and Padme just never really felt like people to me, unfortunately, and so I was never really fully engaged with the story. So what about the story of Knights of the Old Republic? Well, for me, much like the original trilogy, the actual story is perfectly serviceable, but it's more about the worlds and the characters themselves. Anyway, you hunt down star maps on each world, hoping to eventually uncover the location of the Star Forge, an ancient space station that's creating a huge fleet with which the evil, no-jawed, tribal tattooed goon Darth Malak plans to conquer the Republic and the galaxy. There is a twist. Spoilers. Alright, it's a bit clunky and on the nose, and it certainly does ape the I am your father revelation scene of Empire Strikes Back. It's really a twist, just for the sake of a twist. But you know what? It actually works really quite well, in a purely pyrotechnic kind of way, and it's certainly made a big impact, and has really stayed with people over the years, so yeah.
The Force flows through you like no student we have ever seen. But you're willful and headstrong, a dangerous combination.
Before we send you to investigate the ruins, you must be trained in the ways of the Jedi, so that you can resist the darkness within yourself, within all of us. Otherwise, you are doomed to fail.
We must begin your training at once. You have a destiny upon you that you must be prepared to face. The entire fate of the galaxy is upon you.
I can only hope you will prove up to the task.
The path you have chosen to walk is difficult. Intensive training will prepare you physically for the demands of the Order. Meditation will teach you to channel the power of the Force. To truly understand the way of the Jedi, you must open your mind to knowledge. Seek wisdom in the teachings of the great masters of our Order. The Jedi is never alone. Others in the Order will always stand by you. You and Bastila share a special bond. Do not be afraid to turn to her when you need help in your training. The way of the Jedi is difficult. It requires great discipline. Yet even though you are a mere apprentice, your potential is unlimited. And your progress amazing. In all my years, I have never seen one who has mastered the initial training so quickly. You have done in weeks what many cannot do in years. I am honored to welcome you fully into the Jedi Order. Soon your apprenticeship will end, and you will be granted the title of Padawan.
A lot of the discussion of this game centered around the famous twist in the story later on, but I actually think that for many of us, the simple act of getting to Dantooine, entering into Jedi training, and constructing your own lightsaber was the point where this game really won us over. It was a fantastic bit of wish fulfillment, and although the way it's presented here all looks a bit quaint now, it was the coolest fucking thing ever at the time. Playing it back today, it makes me wonder about how much more engaging and emotionally resonant the whole prequel trilogy might have been had Anakin been doing things like this. Had the films been told more from his perspective, growing up on Tatooine, leaving home, going through his Jedi training, his relationship with Obi-Wan, etc., etc. For my money, there isn't really one central character that we identify with in the prequels, and yeah. There's a great sense of enthusiasm to this game. The developers were having fun with the source material, and that's something I'd really like to see more of in Star Wars today. Anyway, over the course of your journey, you can become a Jedi or a Sith if you please, and you're faced with the prospect of the headstrong and highly strung Bastila turning to the dark side towards the end of the game.
Revan, I knew you'd come for me. Sadly, I know this is true. Had you reclaimed the power of your previous identity, I would be your apprentice, not Malak's. But you rejected the dark side. Now you must pay the price. Here on the Star Forge, the power of the dark side is at its strongest. This time, you will not defeat me.
If you're a light side character, like I always am, then you'll have to try and turn her back, or batter her to death. There's a really intriguing subplot / backdrop to the events of the game about the ancient race of builders, which is definitely a big part of the appeal of this game for me. I'm not going to go into the minutiae of it all, but I will say that this probably the most interesting aspect of the whole story for me, and one that taps into the sense of vast expanses of time and distance that's hinted at by the original movies, is only really possible because the story is set far away from the original trilogy. Anyway, whizzing on through, you destroy the Star Forge, and Revan, your character's true identity, either saves the Republic or unites the Sith, twats the Republic, and sets out to conquer the galaxy.
We Jedi now have another tale to weave into the grand history of our eternal order. The redemption of Revan, the prodigal knight. Wherever you go, you will be recognized as the saviors of the galaxy, the heroes of our age. But you must remain ever vigilant, for one day you may be called upon yet again to defend the glory of the Republic against the tyranny of the dark side. For this is the destiny of the Jedi.
The light side ending is pretty celebratory and on the nose, with no real particular slant or unresolved plot points or ambiguities or anything like that, much like the original Star Wars film really, and although I don't think it's exactly the high point of the game or anything, it definitely works. Ultimately, Knights of the Old Republic 1 is really a simple story about good and evil, with likeable, relatable, and somewhat interesting characters, dressed in beautiful and fascinating trappings, with just a hint of something deeper and more philosophical at work, which is exactly what Star Wars started out as, really. When I was a kid, there was only the Star Wars trilogy. Look at what Star Wars is now. A hairball of sometimes beautiful, but really quite badly mismatched elements, hastily stuck together in a frequently ham-fisted way. In my opinion, the rot started long before Disney entered the fray, but that's not the point of this video. My question is, where, if anywhere, can we go now? Well, there have been little green shoots here and there. Season 1 of The Mandalorian has gotten closest to harnessing a little bit of that magic, in my opinion. Season 1 gave us an episodic format with new, unrelated worlds, new characters, and a story centered around two likeable, cool, somewhat interesting, if a bit overly derivative leads. The story also, at first at least, had dramatically lower stakes than what was going on in the movies, which for me put back a little bit of that sense of scale that Star Wars once possessed. I had hoped that they would stick to that formula. Unfortunately, although Season 2 of The Mandalorian had some great moments, no, not that one, it eventually capitulated and started creeping back towards one of those linking threads between various trilogies, fanservice-y, here's a thing that you recognise, nod nod wink wink type things. And then there was the Book of Boba Fett and... oh bollocks. Well, we at least saw some potential there. There's also Star Wars Visions, an animated anthology created by an array of anime directors. This was an interesting, cool, but mixed bag for me, but there were certainly times when I was watching an episode, breathing in a new location, or sussing out an interesting new character or concept, that I just felt a sense of relief. That for once, I wasn't having to carry that fucking massive iron treasure trunk that is the Skywalker saga with me on this journey. And that was a very nice feeling indeed. Gigantic mega-budget movies are more like amusement park rides than films these days, and Star Wars has quite a bit to answer for in that department actually. So it's kind of ironic that the blockbuster format it played a massive part in formulating has actually become kind of a straitjacket by this point. I'm by no means saying that they couldn't do a better job than they did with the sequel trilogy, but I still feel that the medium itself is hampering its development, or maybe its survival is a better word. The sheer scale of these projects and the external pressures involved are just too great and too stifling in one way or another. In my opinion, the somewhat lower stakes involved in making television and video games is a better fit for Star Wars going forward. Potentially, at least, these mediums will allow it to move into the kinds of areas it needs to if it's going to retain any sort of creative vitality. Will the creators of Star Wars allow it to wander off to pastures new? Will we ever find a brave new Star Wars continent to explore? Well, I'll believe it when I see it, but I wouldn't write it off completely. I know the comics have been doing some of the things I've been talking about for donkey's years, and there's the new High Republic stuff and whatever else, but I'm really talking about the mainline Star Wars projects. We have Quantic Dream's Star Wars Eclipse coming up, which looks interesting and certainly visually impressive. We'll see what that brings to the table soon, I guess. But I do have the sneaking suspicion that we'll still be rearranging the existing elements of Star Wars, or giving them a different coat of paint, rather than going back to the sources that George was drawing from when he created the Star Wars fictional universe. Knights of the Old Republic is also doing this, of course, but particularly with the second one, I think it's also steering us into some genuinely interesting places. Anyway, at the risk of sounding like a completely pretentious prick, all the current Star Wars material is concerned with the manifestations and not the real essence of the source material. What the fuck are you talking about, Retro Mule? Well, let me give you an example. Amongst lots of other stuff, originally Star Wars was a mashup of genre flicks like Kurosawa samurai films, Flash Gordon serials, and old World War II dogfighting movies. And one of the other things Lucasfilm could do is simply take another genre and give it the Star Warsification treatment. Off the top of my head, what about a hard-boiled noir detective series set on Nar Shaddaa, for example? Or an honest-to-God Kurosawa-style samurai movie with limited technology featuring some ancient proto-Jedi type dudes? No? How about...
Monkey tennis?
Now, I think this was kind of the idea with The Mandalorian originally, but it got sucked back into the vortex somewhere in Season 2. But it's an idea, at least.
So these stories of mythology are simply trying to express a truth that can't be grasped any other way.
It's the edge, the interface between what can be known and what is never to be discovered, because it is a mystery transcendent of all human research. The source of life. What is it? No one knows.
Why are stories important for getting at that?
Well, I think it's important to live life with a knowledge of its mystery and of your own mystery. And it gives life a new zest, a new balance, a new harmony to do this. I mean, therapy and psychological therapy, when people find out what it is that's ticking in them, they get straightened out. And what is it that life is? I find thinking in mythological terms has helped people visibly. You can see it happen.
How? What does it do?
It erases anxieties. It puts them in accord with the inevitables of their life, and they can see the positive values of what are the negative aspects of what is positive. It's whether you're going to say no to the serpent.
Alternatively, in The Hero with 1,000 Faces, the Joseph Campbell book that was a big source of inspiration for Lucas, Campbell explores the theory that mythological narratives frequently share a fundamental structure. He identifies and describes a lot of archetypal characters and elements. A number of these we've already seen in Star Wars, of course, but there are surely many more permutations that the Star Wars fictional universe can work through. The deep dark forest, the big bad wolf, the sly, cunning fox, the protective cloak, the long and winding path, the majestic castles, the fool, the magician, the high priestess, the empress, the sun, the moon, the wheel of fortune, and so on and so on. All this is really quite a wellspring to draw from, really, and it's far more interesting than most of the stuff we're getting now, in my opinion. Anyway, back to Knights of the Old Republic, and more specifically its sequel. The Sith Lords is genuinely dark. In fact, it's black to the core.
Is adrift in space after a terrible battle. Most of its crew are dead or dying. You lie in the medical room in critical condition. You won't survive long without medical attention.
This is as close to a Star Wars gothic horror film as we're ever likely to get, and it's quite possibly the best Star Wars thing that I've ever experienced outside of the original 3 movies. At this point, I should say that I'm not praising this game simply because it is dark, or suggesting that that's where Star Wars should be going. I'm praising it because it does something different and interesting with the source material, and it showed that Star Wars can be at least relatively new and different and still work and still feel like Star Wars and still sell. Knights of the Old Republic: The Sith Lords deserves to be compared to The Empire Strikes Back. I'm not saying it's as good or better or worse exactly because it's kind of comparing oranges and apples for one thing, but it at least deserves to be discussed in the same breath. Star Wars is essentially a series of children's films, and that's how it probably should stay. But kids' films, like the European fairy tales before them, are more than capable of containing some dark and frightening themes, creatures, and situations. After finishing the first game, I kept wondering to myself what I'd like in a sequel. Well, they should really go dark, like with The Empire Strikes Back, I thought to myself. Well, when the game did eventually turn up, just 1 year later, it gave me everything I'd hoped for and more. In fact, I couldn't quite believe, at times, how far down the writing rabbit hole they'd gone with this one. Spoilers ahoy! You are the Exile, a war veteran and former Jedi Knight with some gigantic skeletons in his or her closet. Throughout the course of the game, you restore your connection to the Force, and with the help of your playable companions, you set out to stop the Sith. So, not really much of a story in and of itself, but the magic of the Sith Lords is in its telling, and in its bad guys. The game features 3 main antagonists: Darth Treya, a mysterious assailant who remains in the dark through most of the game, Darth Sion, an undead Scottish Sith Lord who's clearly not been using his Dipper base, and finally, there's Darth Nihilus, a Sith Lord whose physical being was destroyed due to his immense affinity with the Force. All of them are interesting and, yeah, kind of genuinely frightening. And then there's Kreia. For my money, she's one of the very few characters from outside the original trilogy who's genuinely worthy of being part of the Star Wars pantheon. She is a real bona fide archetypal character, in the manner of the farm boy, princess, wizard, rogue characters of the original movies. She is an old witch / crone, basically, and as the game goes on, she becomes something of a mentor figure to you, but you're never quite sure whether she's actually evil or not, and the sense of tension and chemistry between the two of you is fantastically well done, especially considering you basically play a silent avatar with relatively little to say. Just look at this low-key introductory sequence and just compare it to the dialogue sequences in the prequels. It's just in a different league.
Find what you're looking for amongst the dead? Close to death. Yes, closer than I'd like. You have the smell of the KOTOR tank about you. How do you feel? Yes, I had hoped as much. I slept here too long and could not awaken. It may be I reached out unconsciously, and your mind must have been a willing one. Or perhaps you have been trained for such things. I am Kreia, and I am your rescuer, as you are mine. Tell me, do you recall what happened? Your ship was attacked. You were the only survivor, a result of your Jedi training, no doubt. Your stance, your walk tells me you are a Jedi. Your walk is heavy. You carry something that weighs you down. So it would seem. Keep your past and let us focus on the now. I do not know. I was removed from the events of the world as I slept. A survey of the surroundings may provide the answers we seek. The ship we arrived in must still be in this place. We should recover it and leave.
When I watched The Last Jedi for the first time, particularly during the Luke-Rey dialogue on Act 2, I saw certain elements that I recognised from this game, particularly in the discussions about the hypocrisy of the Jedi, the wish to end the duality of light side, dark side, and the general moral grey areas and all that business. But the movie didn't go nearly as far as Knights of the Old Republic 2.
I saw what you did to those exchange thugs, stranger. Can you spare a few credits, maybe help another refugee in need? Thank you, stranger. I won't forget your kindness.
Why did you do such a thing? Such kindnesses will mean nothing. His path is set. Giving him what he has not earned is like pouring sand into his hands. And would that be a kindness? What if by surviving another day he brings a greater darkness upon another? The Force binds all things. The slightest push, the smallest touch, sends echoes throughout life. Even an act of kindness may have more severe repercussions than you know or can see. By giving him something he has not earned, perhaps all you have helped him become is a target. Seeing another elevated often brings the eyes of others who suffer. And perhaps in the end, all you have wrought is more pain. And that is my lesson to you. Be careful of charity and kindness, lest you do more harm with open hands than with a clenched fist. Does it matter? Of course it does. Such titles allow you to break the galaxy into light and dark, categorize it. Perhaps I am naive, and I hold both as what they are, pieces of a whole. Know that I am your teacher, and that is enough. What do you wish to hear? That I once believed in the code of the Jedi? That I felt the call of the Sith? That perhaps once I held the galaxy galaxy by its throat, that for every good work that I did, I brought equal harm upon the galaxy, that perhaps what the greatest of the Sith Lords knew of evil they learned from me, what would it matter now? There is only so much comfort in knowing such things, and it is not who I am now. There are dark places in the galaxy where few tread, ancient centers of learning, of knowledge, but I did not walk alone. To be united by hatred is a fragile alliance at best. But my will was not law. There were disagreements, ambition, and hunger for power. There are techniques within the Force against which there is no defense. Cast down, stripped of my power, exiled. I suffered indignities and fell into darkness. Learn from me my mistakes and use that knowledge to become greater than I. That is all I ask of you, and that is all I desire. In you all my hopes rest, the future, the Force.
It turns out that the great and terrible deed your character did on Malachor 5 while fighting the marauding Mandalorian forces, deploying a mass shadow generator, thus killing everyone on the planet and destroying the planet itself, it seems, was such a grave and terrible event that it has in fact created a wound in the Force. You are a sort of Force vacuum.
What? No way! This is not a thing.
Unwillingly attracting a small band of loyal followers as you traipse around the galaxy attempting to hunt down the Sith. Kreia, otherwise known as Darth Treya, sees great beauty in you because, a bit like Luke in The Last Jedi, she is done with the Sith and the Jedi and the Force itself, and in you she sees the death of it all.
It is said that the Force has a will. It has a destiny for us all. I wield it, but it uses us all, and that is abhorrent to me, because I hate the Force. I hate that it seems to have a will, that it would control us to achieve some measure of balance when countless lives are lost. But in you, I see the potential to see the Force die, to turn away from its will, and that is what pleases me. You are beautiful to me, Exile. A dead spot in the Force, an emptiness in which its will might be denied.
It's pretty dark stuff indeed, and actually quite interesting philosophically, and most importantly, utterly absorbing. Unfortunately, this game had many bugs, and it almost falls apart entirely at the end, or at least it did in the original Xbox version that I played back in the day. But you know what? I can forgive its flaws. That's a pretty rare skill these days. I can see past the aged graphics and funny animations, the bugs and the somewhat limited combat. I can see past it because behind those relatively minor flaws lies the atmosphere, the music, the characters, the interesting philosophical stuff, the scary bad guys, and the ominous and meditative tone. As the Exile drifts out into space, into the distant, unknown regions of the galaxy, in this most haunting and fatalistic of endings, it occurred to me that this game was more successful than any movie outside of the original trilogy in generating real magic, mystery, and maybe even profundity from the Star Wars fictional universe. It was magic of a different kind to those of the original movies, but it was equally valid in my opinion. The unknown regions of the galaxy. Maybe somewhere out there there's a place where we can actually have some fun with Star Wars. At least we might find a place where both the fans and the source material don't bang their fucking skulls together with such nauseating regularity. And maybe, who knows, we might, possibly, maybe, even find some common ground. We didn't get a Knights of the Old Republic 3, but how would they have wrapped this whole thing up? You know what? I'm glad they didn't. If there's one thing Star Wars desperately needs at this point, and what it used to have plenty of before the prequel trilogy, in my book, is more gaps in the story, more ambiguities, more holes in the fabric of the world that allows us to exercise our imaginations and to simply wonder, what if? So please, Lucasfilm, don't make a film or TV series of Knights of the Old Republic itself. Use it as a source of inspiration by all means, but please just give us something else. Take your own path. To quote something Master Vandar never actually said, "When pointing to the moon am I? Stare at my finger, you should not." Oh dear. Oh no. Fuck it. You remember how in the 90s, in the UK at least, you couldn't see Star Wars on TV, and it, along with a lot of Disney movies, if I remember correctly, were only released for a limited time only on VHS. Both of these properties had a sense of being truly special and rare back in those days. And it's this elusiveness and paucity of content, the stuff we didn't see, the stuff that exists only in our imaginations, that was always the key element of the magic and mystery of Star Wars. We used to see only a sliver of what seemed like a galaxy's worth of potential. Ironically, for all the massive amounts of detail and lore, all the filling in of inconsequential details, and the clumsy linking together of the various trilogies, characters, situations, and events, the irony is that the other movies have only really succeeded in making that world feel smaller. Can this magic ever be recaptured? Well, considering Knights of the Old Republic exists, and given the vastness of the canvas presented to us by George Lucas, in theory at least, it's certainly possible, at least to a certain extent. Will the content creators at Lucasfilm and Disney have the creative nous, artistic integrity, and the wherewithal to actually do it? And perhaps more importantly, would Star Wars fans agree on it? Would general audiences be interested? Well, that's the paradox, isn't it? And to be perfectly honest, in a major motion picture at least, I kinda doubt it on both counts. So, are we fucked then? Most probably yes, but hey, we can always dream, can't we?